Sandy will be back in just a moment as well. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? 3.0, audience and communication. Hi audience, nice to see our people here. Does anyone have anything that they want to talk about that is not, that is, the purpose of this agenda item is to provide the general public an opportunity to address the board on matters not on the agenda. And I think also anything that is an action item. Are any of you here to talk to the board tonight or just to listen? Okay, great. Thanks for coming. 4.0 presentations. 4.1 SU purchase services. Is that you?
No,
Sandy?
that's isn't 4.1 the local?
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm in my wrong packet. I'm so sorry, everybody. 4.0, 4.1 local academic rigor indicators.
Just gonna need about a minute.
Interventions.
On the table, maybe.
Kristen, is that something for me to sign? Yeah, I think we have to wait until we approve. Yeah, they've been missing. Yeah. So. Were you at the party?
No, I didn't have a chance to go. Did you go? Did you go?
No, because I was here at 5.
Oh, right.
You need help? Is it, oh.
Sandy,
Yes.
you ever see this box?
You guys sure you don't have anything you want to talk about? We're looking to fill some time. The book fairs.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, the book fairs this week. And the craft fair.
Oh, good, there it is.
All right, do you want a light off for this?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be easier to see the graphs.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
we're, I don't
yeah,
think we're
last
quite
time.
there yet.
Oh, you want the light on still while you're working with that?
We're good. Thank you for your patience. I will pass around
Oh, I'll do that.
our copies.
I'll pass it. You're talking. So tonight we're going to present the indicators and interventions for 2014. We'll start off with our local indicators and provide an overview of our school's multi-tiered system of support, which may be familiar to you because we did share a presentation last year about this.
So it's important to keep in mind the comments that Molly just presented at the SU board meeting and looking at some of these. So this is a local indicator. This slide shows that 84% of our second graders in 2013-14 were at or above proficient, as indicated by the BAS assessment. The BAS is a assessment by Fontes and Pinnell, and it stands for the Benchmark Assessment System, and it's an assessment designed to give information about a student's reading level. and it's given to all kindergarten to fourth grade students. This measure gives us information about a student's reading strengths and areas of challenge. There are benchmark criteria at each grade level, and the assessment is diagnostic in that it allows us to use the information to plan for our instruction. So when you actually dig deeper into the actual protocol of a BAS assessment for a student, there are many, many layers of analysis you can do to give you information about what are the next steps for this student. But this is just a gross measure showing that second graders last year in the spring, 84% of them met that benchmark that was set by the SU.
Greg just shared a local indicator, and this particular slide is our NECAP indicator, so it's a summative state assessment. And this slide shows the percentage of 5th and 8th graders for CCS students who performed proficient and above on the 2013-14 NECAP reading assessment. And in both cases this past year, 92% of students were proficient or above in reading at CCS.
So similar to the slide Audrey just showed, this is a standardized summative assessment. This is not a local assessment, but this is again NECAP in math. And the two bars here indicate last year's third graders and last year's fifth graders. And the percentage indicates how many students were proficient or above on the NECAP in math. Again, just to bring to your attention, in the assessment presentation from the spring, you would see multi-years and multi-cohorts of data. This indicator's presentation just have the single kind of dipstick. So this is look back to local indicator here, but still on math. And this is data about grade 2 and grade 4 fact fluency. This is a local assessment it's actually been created locally. And the important piece to know about this assessment area is that this is an area that is undergoing considerable change. Since it became an indicator, we teach fact fluency through the Bridges program, where fluency is expected in increasingly early grades in the Common Core. So the cutoff points for what is now called automaticity, or in this case, a student would be proficient, have changed and will be adjusted in next year's assessment as well. So this data shows the first year for these increased expectations, and again, they'll go up again a little bit. The expectations will change slightly next year. But that is the data from last year. So the first bar indicates, because it might be hard to see, this, the number of second graders who met the benchmark in addition. The second bar is subtraction. And then fourth graders, number of students who met the benchmark in multiplication, and then division.
Okay, this slide represents a local indicator for 8th graders, and it shows the percentage of CCS students who successfully completed Algebra 1 in 8th grade for the 2013-14 school year. These students are currently taking either core geometry or math seminar as 9th graders at CVU this year.
So when it's completed algebra, it's those who performed well enough on the final exam?
Yes,
to
to
qualify
successfully
for geometry?
for geometry or math seminar.
Thank you.
Just to get a sense for how these new standards, just to back up a slide, the fact fluency,
Yes.
in your judgment, how do those line up with, or how would they sort of compare to math kneecaps? So these are fourth graders, in fifth grade they take the kneecap. Are these more rigorous standards in proficiency on a kneecap?
Eric, I would really hesitate to associate these with NECAP in any way, because this is really a discrete automaticity skill, and NECAP is a standards-based assessment.
So this is the, in grade 2, do so many addition problems in a minute and get them correct.
Correct.
And I forget the benchmark, but it's what, 28 or 30?
I'd have to go check, because it's
Yeah.
been changed.
Yes.
We've
and they
changed it.
Yeah, and they've changed between my daughters. All right, okay,
Yep, and what we've seen these numbers go down as the benchmarks have gone up.
have gone up, sure.
And that, some of that is due to the Common Core standards being more rigorous in these grades around automaticity.
Okay, for science kneecap, again, this is a summative state indicator of success for science for students in grades 4 and 8. And it shows the percentage of 4th and 8th grade students who performed proficient or above on the 2013 and 2014 kneecap science assessment. This is normally taken in the spring in May. And we show you 2 years, 2013 and 14, but please note that, again, this is a different group of students each year that is taking this. I can also just share that our 4th graders for the 2014 year ranked 15th in the state as far as kneecap scores, and our 8th grade students ranked 2 this year.
Hold on a sec, back up, please. None of this is disaggregated, so why do we not have this? When you just gave a verbal representation, why do we not have this information for CCS
For
in this form?
in this form, I guess I'm not understanding your question.
This is CSSU students.
I'm
fourth
sorry,
and
it should
fifth.
have been changed to CCS students. That's incorrect. That is
Title on the slide
the
is
title on the
incorrect.
slide is incorrect. This is CCS students. We just did not take.
Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
sorry about that. It is our students' representation. Thanks for catching that, though, Clyde. And now we're going to turn to our multi-tiered system of support. And again, just want to share that a lot of what you're going to see this evening is a presentation that we gave back in the spring. I believe it was March of last year. And we're just going to review it again, how we meet our students' needs who are not performing at proficiency or need support in literacy and math.
Yeah. And because of that, we'll move through these slides at a little bit of a quicker pace than we did last year, because this should be, some of this is repetition. So a multi-tiered system of support, a continuum of instruction that's flexible, differentiated, ongoing, and targeted to the specific needs of each student as informed by individuals' assessment data. We've also been talking about, you've heard us talk about tiers, multi-tiers, but we've also been talking about sort of this metaphor of a blanket or a net, where there are lots of different threads of our system that together come together to really make sure that there's no way a student's going to be in a fragile situation and we're not going to notice it and then intervene. And then track the intervention and look for response to the intervention and adjust the intervention based on what we're seeing. So that's a sort of a metaphor that we're coming back to. That's sort of this flat but tight net under our students. So this, I don't expect you to be able to really digest all that tonight, but these are guiding principles for intervention that a group known as TILT, the Tiered Instructional Leadership Team, over the last few years under Megan Roy's leadership, have developed these guiding principles for intervention. And these guiding principles are based on what research has said over recent years about what makes good intervention. And then also, this is driven by a white paper that was produced around, it's called the Field Guide to the MTSS RTII Field Guide that was produced with VRI, UVM, and the AOE in collaboration. But essentially, these guiding principles around collaboration, inclusive practice, expertise, evidence-based instruction, and data-driven decision-making are what drives the decision-making we undergo when we're in Kid Talk meetings, EST meetings, and all the decisions that teachers are making about how to approach student learning.
Okay, this may look familiar to you. This is actually a graphic of our multi-tiered system of support, which we refer to the acronym MTSS. And a multi-tiered system of support allows us to identify students who are struggling, provide specific, targeted, high-quality intervention, and monitor their progress. And again, Greg's talking about different tiers. So we start off with early identification of students, and then there may be a student who needs some support, and we do some classroom-based instruction. If that students are not responsive to that, We may do some Tier 2 interventions. And if, again, after a series of interventions at Tier 2, a student is not making progress, we may look at Tier 3 interventions, or what we refer to as special education. A key component in the cycle, as you can see, that we identify an intervention and we monitor and adjust as we go along for students. And we're going to spend a little bit time on each of those components, but Greg's going to share a little bit more about our educational support system.
Okay, you may need your sunglasses for this next slide. It's a little busy. And you might recognize this from last spring. This flow chart illustrates the MTSS structures at CCS. And we might bounce back to this slide as we cover some of the other areas that Audrey just gave an overview of. But essentially, this kind of illustrates, not kind of illustrates, this does illustrate a path of, and the structures we have in place to create that blanket, that net I spoke of earlier. On one side of this document is the systems and structures to support students around strictly academic concerns with a focus on math and literacy. And on this, the other side of this document focuses on social, emotional, behavioral, and other. And those two things happen in parallel. 2 years ago, those things used to happen through the same kind of pipeline. And what we found is that it created a logjam because we were trying to do too much with one setup. So we have these systems running in parallel. So a big part of this is this piece around a universal data review. And those are built in throughout the year after our universal assessment periods. There's one in the beginning of October, and there's a universal data review in the beginning of February. When we do those grade level data reviews, we identify what are the tier 1 implications. So what is this data saying about how, as a teacher, I'm going to adjust instruction for the whole class? Not for Johnny or Susie, but what am I going to do differently for the whole class based on patterns of this data? And we do this again as a grade level team. Most teams now have 2 or 3 teachers on them. Then, at that same meeting, we say, well, in addition to those tier 1 adjustments, these other kids are showing a little bit higher level of concern, and we want to make sure that we give them some extra. So in addition to those tier 1 adjustments, we're going to give them targeted tier 2 interventions. We're going to give something that we think is just right for what they need, and document what that is, and then come back and talk about it at the interim data review 8 weeks later to make sure that the students are making progress. If they're not making the progress we expect, we adjust those interventions. And that's a continuous cycle. If over time students don't make we adjust interventions, we monitor the response, we adjust interventions, and we're not happy with the response, students are put on the EST agenda. And an EST is a standing team. It's called Educational Support Team. Every school in Vermont is required to have one. And that team is just the next level of team to really look at all the data for that student and say, okay, let's tighten this plan around this student. Again, there's a monitoring system for that. And that is the team that could decide after some time, maybe there's more we need to know about the student as a learner. Maybe we need to do what's called a comprehensive evaluation or a special education evaluation, which could result in identifying the student as having a learning disability. And they might be eligible for an IEP or a 504 plan, or we might just get more information. They won't be eligible for special education, but we're going to now have more information to inform the EST plan. So that's an overview of the academic piece, which is the focus today. There's this other parallel system around social, emotional, and behavioral concerns, and of course, and executive functioning and other things. And of course, the academic and the social, emotional, and other, those areas overlap. And we have conversations about both in both of these forums, but we had to split it out like this to make our systems be more effective.
Okay, the single most important element of our tiered system is to ensure that all students have access to high-quality first instruction. And our professional development over the past 3 or 4 years has really reinforced this. Our work in the best practices in mathematics and the Common Core ELA and math standards, we've really been focusing on providing teachers with instructional strategies to ensure students have high-quality first instruction. And MTSS helps us to be focused on providing the support and intervention students need so that they can access, and in some cases, return to their first instruction. Our main goal, as Greg showed you the chart to the left, is that we really would like all students to always have high-quality first instruction. So after maybe having support within the classroom or Tier 2, and sometimes in Tier 3, that we get students back into first instruction with the classroom teacher. So that's always our goal with the tiered system.
So the next sort of bubble in that cycle is the fact that we need to identify students who are struggling early. So part of the way we do that is what I described with those data reviews. But even before that, using the comprehensive assessment system that Molly spoke about and all of our local informative assessments that are happening in the classroom, teachers pick up on things about their students on a day-to-day basis, and they adjust intervention, they adjust their instruction accordingly. So classroom-based assessments like exit tasks, end-of-unit assessments, conference notes for readers' conferences or writers' conferences, work samples, listening in on student discourse, all these things are formative data that inform what the teacher is going to do next with these students, and identifying as soon as possible who might the most fragile learners be and what am I going to do differently as a teacher. So I just spoke to this, I think.
Okay, and in some cases, when students are not making progress with classroom targeted instructional strategies, we may move to Tier 2 interventions, and students can access this through data reviews, as Greg has mentioned, our Kid Talk meetings, or educational support team processes that we have in place that referred back into the chart we showed earlier. If a student is identified with not making progress with classroom instruction, we bring them to an EST meeting, Kid Talk meeting, and we discuss doing some Tier 2 interventions. And at that time, we may be doing some additional testing, diagnostic testing, to help us focus and target on a specific area for a student in reading or math. And a key component of this is once we identify those interventions, we need to progress monitor to determine if the interventions are showing progress for the student. So there's always that progress monitoring piece. We review how they're doing every 6 to 8 weeks and decide, is that intervention working? If it's not, let's come back together at the table. Let's try to focus on something else and then target instruction again. A key piece of this is the coordination and communication between the teacher or the literacy coordinator or math interventionist and paras who are providing that intervention with the classroom teacher, because you want to make sure that the interventions you're doing are also aligned with your best first instruction in the classroom. So it's key that you have that communication between the Tier 2 support staff who are providing the interventions with the classroom teacher. And this year we've actually created a site where we have information where the students are receiving Tier 2 supports in math and literacy, and then also where the teacher is as far as they're in their instructional strategies for math or reading, so that there's this ongoing communication. So the math interventionist knows, okay, this is what the teacher's working on this year, or this particular week or unit, as well as in literacy. So it's a nice system, but the coordination piece is also important at Tier 2 level. In some instances, we find that some students do not make progress with Tier 2 support, and we may have to look at if there is a learning disability or something else that's impacting a student's ability to perform in reading and math. And we access this through a comprehensive evaluation. It's normally initiated through an educational support team meeting. And basically, again, there may be more intensive testing. And based on that testing, we learn how a student learns or find out there is a learning disability, and we'll create an individualized intervention. At this point, we create an individualized educational plan, which we refer to as an IEP. It's written and implemented, and again, that monitoring piece. So again, there are goals that are set, and there's that ongoing monitoring to see if student is making progress with the interventions that have been put in place. And that's pretty much our MTSS model.
So what questions are there? Susan?
Could you go back to the slide CCS educational support chart?
This,
This one, yeah.
Yep.
So, on the universal data review side,
yep,
parent contact, I
Yes.
noticed that, on this side, it's sort of like it flows, first it sounds like something happens, the parents are contacted. On this side, I was curious about, you said you progress monitor and you review things 6 to 8 weeks later after somebody sort of initially is identified. So at what
Yes.
point are the parents brought into the process?
great. So it appears, so what it is here is basically after a data review meeting, the students that we identify as benefiting from a little bit more than tier 1, and we want to administer targeted tier 2 interventions, those parents are contacted then after that point, because we want parents to know that their children are getting targeted tier 2 intervention.
So the progress monitor down here, that's 6 to 8 weeks after
Yep.
tier 2.
Yes, and
Okay.
actually, it's actually, the monitoring is happening at every intervention. So every time there's an intervention with that student, the person giving the intervention is actually keeping monitoring data. This 8-week period is actually when we come back together at a team to look at all that monitoring data and say, are we or aren't we satisfied with the progress the student is making?
Okay, and if somebody needs further evaluation, kind of the old school way was there was a certain amount of time that had to go by, like once, it was like within 30 days the child needed to be tested. Is that,
There are two things I'm hearing. There's no hard and fast rule around time for a student to get from here to here.
Mhm.
It's all about the response to the intervention. There are laws there are laws around if an evaluation is, I said, okay, the EST team decides we're gonna do an evaluation, then all that has to happen. You have to have an evaluation planning meeting, I think, within 5 days, and then there's 60 days to get it done.
Okay.
So there are strict
That's-
regulations
okay.
around that. But some of this, if a student, for some reason, let's say a student moves in from out of district, and we're really puzzled by what we're seeing, and we're applying our best tools, and it's very clear that there's not the response we'd expect, this might move quicker than a student we've been tracking since kindergarten.
Thanks.
Sure. Other questions?
This system has been in place how long?
This version of it,
Since we.
well, we tweaked
We
it with the
tweaked it.
two, with the two
Right,
paths. It used to
2 years
be
ago.
funneled down one path, so I'd say 2 years. And then another version of this before that,
Right.
And how long was the version before that?
2 years.
The point of the question is trends regarding how many students are involved in this?
Well, in terms of how many students end up requiring special education, or how many students are involved in this whole process, what exactly are you looking for?
Well, both.
Okay. I would say we don't have that data tonight to report out on. We could look back and see how our number of evaluations, what has happened with that number, and how evaluations result. What percentage of evaluations result in a student being found eligible for special education? That's something we can look back at.
That would be interesting to know.
Okay. What we're finding is that what we're happy about is that we're not being surprised by students. We haven't had a conversation in February or March where we're talking about a student at the table and anybody is saying, well, how come we haven't talked about this student before? Because of this setup, there's really it's very difficult for a student to get to that position with any student because there are these multi-layers of monitoring data.
Yeah, and implementing that universal data review 2 years ago, really, all the students are on our radar.
Yeah.
Whether we're going to take action to go through that, or we know we're going to keep an eye on them. And when we come back for an interim data review, we know we can check to see, okay, is this student still a concern? Do we need to move them
Yeah.
through the process, or are they still someone we're just going to be just on our radar to look at?
To Clyde's point, and a point I had written down to say, which I didn't say, is that this process has changed a little bit each year, and we continue to look at it as a completely living and breathing, and we live through this with the expectation that this needs to be better. This always needs to be better, and there's always ways to make this system better, so we plan next year that it's gonna be better. And we don't know exactly how to make it better, but we're gonna make it better. It's that kind of system, it just, there's always room, plus the staff in the building, your expertise is changing, your toolkits are changing, so it's an ever-evolving system.
Greg, just in terms of the data, universal data review,
Yes,
is that exclusively designed to feed into this process, or is it also used for, in other words, is the data review used for other purposes, to identify kids who need maybe more challenge, or identify other things that are going on in the classroom, or is it kind of specifically designed for the,
Yeah.
the support side of the equation?
it's specifically designed for the support side of the conversation. However, it doesn't mean that if you notice that, wow, look at this data set and this cluster of students that are performing at this level, and as a teacher, I'm feeling like I'm not meeting their needs, what ideas are there? That could happen, but we haven't, that's not why the process is built.
Because we do hear about differentiated instruction in the
Yep.
math curriculum in particular. I think that there's been some emphasis put on the fact that you're trying to fine tune it across a sort of heterogeneous group of kids, and just wondered how much of that was subjective and how much of that draws upon your data that you're collecting.
Eric, I can share last year, when we did our 6th grade data review, we saw that we had some students who needed some additional support with multiplicative reasoning, and that some students were beyond that. So what we ended up doing as a result of the data review, and we differentiated for students, we did a 6 to 8 week unit, where students who needed some more enrichment, we had some activities on a weekly basis for like a 6 week period, 6 to 8 week period. And students who needed more support with that, we gave them that. And then students were just on grade level, we provided them with some things. So we did use that model because the data showed us that, so we responded to that.
The other piece is that some of the formative things I mentioned, like exit tasks and end of unit assessments, combined with the professional development we're doing around best practices, that is informing teachers in terms of things like questioning, pairings, discourse. So those are more day-to-day differentiation decisions based on the more day-to-day data.
Last year, or perhaps the year before, I forget which, the legislature passed a law with a commitment in it to individualized learning programs without any definition of what that was, but concept. So if you remove the qualifiers from here, the implications of children performing below expectation, and you're just talking about a generic student, how would an individualized learning program differentiate from this? I mean, even gifted and talented children are going to have things they don't understand, and if you were attending to their needs as well as those at the lower end of the spectrum, I imagine you would have a process similar to this, or am I mistaken?
I think you might be referring to personalized learning
Excuse me,
plans.
yes, yeah.
I can share a little bit about
Sure.
that, because it's going to be happening for all 7th graders by November 2015, have to have a personalized learning plan. I'm not sure yet, because we're still learning about that this year as we get ready for that, how that's going to impact the support chart here. What I do know is that in the spring, it's currently going to be the 6th graders who are impacted by this. We're actually going to be doing what's called an interest survey to assess what their learning style is and what they're supposedly inclined to do for a career path and just what they're interested in. We're going to be actually providing those surveys and then helping us to decide what their PLPs will be in the fall. But it's still too soon for us to know how that impacts this here, and how a student who may be underachieving and how that will affect their personalized learning plan at this time.
Well, my point is, or part of my point is, this sounds like a personalized learning program arrangement for children identified as underachievers. So as you approach the personalized learning program for everybody, this seems like a good model, as I say, if you remove the qualifiers about their level on the spectrum.
There are, for the personalized learning plans, what we've learned in some schools who have piloted, that there are kind of reviews that you do with each student to review what their goal setting pieces were, and then if they've achieved those. So you're correct in that model that, in essence, the child will have their own individualized plan, and that there will be key points where we're checking to see progress with that and goals that they've set for the year.
As an aside to the board, this is going to get very expensive, even by our standards. Thank you.
Just to the extent that this is called indicators and interventions, is there anyone or is there one or more person in our school who is involved with the work that Molly's doing? I'm not sure if that's just an SU level enterprise, and her portion tonight was pretty abbreviated.
So at the building level?
Yes.
Yeah.
People in our,
Yeah.
our literacy and math board, our specialists have been involved with helping with the indicators.
Okay.
As well, and then the other piece is that the team I mentioned, the TILT team, Tiered Instructional Leadership Team, that involves the literacy coordinators, myself, special educator, and this year a middle level teacher. So that team also looks at how are we doing interventions. That's more on the intervention side than the indicator side.
Okay.
But they are certainly related.
They're linked.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
5.0, reports to the board. 5.1, principals report. I don't know if there's anything you want to highlight, or if you just want
Are there any questions from the
questions.
board about this report?
Well, to me, it sounds like the school safety stuff is going very well, and I'm pleased that Mike and Vicki and Kathy were recognized for PBIS.
Well, the school is
Actually, the
recognized
school was
Or they- I
recognized.
They were
yes,
there.
They were there to,
to get the recognition.
right,
Right.
the whole school.
Yeah. Yeah,
Anyone
the
have-
safety stuff has gotten some good traction, I think. Again, something that we can never be good enough at.
Moving on, 5.2 CSSU debrief. I don't know if there's anything, it was a very, very long meeting. We didn't have nearly enough time for the common topic, really abbreviated Molly's presentation. And sort of the hot topics I think we're getting to later in our own agenda. So the one thing, Steve Dale from the VSBA was there and just reminded us all that we are a member organization of the Vermont School Boards Association, and that if ever we want to access them, they're really there to serve us. So if you're not getting the email updates, let them know, and always their website's a good resource for us. Is there anything else, Susan, Eric? Glad you were there for part. All right, 5.3, Facilities Committee.
So I guess I'm just going to give, Greg is presenting a couple of points down on the capital projects plan for the next few years. I just wanted to pull out a couple things just to highlight things that we've been talking about at the committee. One, first off, you recognize a lot of what we're going to talk about from the presentations last year. Things that we've sort of identified as concerns that need to be taken care of in the immediate future, in the very near future, that will require asking the voters to approve a bond. And those include roof repairs, which we've talked about, over the art atrium, the gymnasium, the north roof on the 1996 wing. And there's been some concerns raised with the lighting in the 1969 wing. It's all old fluorescent lighting that has become brittle, and there's some concerns with arcing. So that was part of my presentation last year, was relighting that wing. That has kind of come up more now as a safety concern. So the things we've sort of marked as urgent concerns are keeping the building weather tight and safety concerns.
Excuse me, did you say sparking?
Arcing.
Arcing.
Arcing. No,
Also bad.
not quite there. And one further item in that group is the main elevator of the building is an aged mechanical. It's coming to a point where having it repaired is no longer actually feasible. They're not making parts for it. There's nobody who will service it. It's currently operational. But it's one of those things that if it breaks down, we're gonna have to fix it because it's required by law. So that's in that group, and so Greg will talk about that further when he gets to it. Two, you'll notice there'll be a list of things for the 1939 building. That again goes back to something we discussed last year. However, the facility committee has been discussing what the school would look like if we took that building out of service. If we could do what we do in that building within the footprint, not including that building, and what that would look like. Thereby, the project we discussed last year would be much smaller. That building is a money loser. It's decrepit. It needs a lot of work to make it a long-term usable building. You'll see some of the numbers when Greg presents. We will probably come to you next meeting to find some money to talk to an architect about what the school looks like if we take that building out of service, and where we could put a library within the existing footprint, where we could put a kitchen within the existing footprint. As our population, school population drops off, do we need that extra square footage? As a cost savings to the voters, I think that's something worth looking at. That building is not gonna save anybody any money. We have to do something about it. And if we can do something about it while placing those services within the existing footprint, that's something worth looking at. So Greg will talk about that more when he gets to it. And finally, on the maintenance plan, there's a line item for an annual contribution to a construction fund. It's something we don't do. I feel strongly that having a contribution, we can discuss the size every year, into a fund that we can tap when something needs to be fixed, and not have to, you know, if we had been doing this for 10 years or 5 years or something, maybe we wouldn't have to go in for a bond at the moment to fix a roof or something. But that's something that's on there. Again, obviously all open for discussion, but that's something I believe is smart and something that we should discuss.
So
So
should that
are you
go on a
talking
future
about
agenda
something-
as an action or discussion item? Okay.
Other than the SURF fund?
The SURF fund is empty.
And the reason it's empty is because we don't have any money.
That's right.
So you
That's-
can't very well put things into a fund if you don't have money to put it.
So I'm talking about it would come out of it would be part of our budgeting process.
So you're saying in the budgeting process, you would include money to contribute to the SURF fund at the end of the year?
Sure. Or as part of the budgeting process, yes. It would be a line item in our budget for something like the main elevator goes kaput, and we don't have to.
And was Bob part of that conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
And
I was just wondering if we're allowed, I'm not sure if we're allowed to collect money with them.
did you have an amount in mind?
Greg has put $25,000 a year as a discussion point. that grows pretty quick.
If you don't have any need for it in any particular year.
Right. However, if it's there, sure, it's gonna get used to put a roof somewhere, to put better lighting somewhere, yes. It'll get used to do something that we need.
So-
Or also to work on things that it might be less expensive to deal with it now than 5 years from now when it
Well, not everything, but yes,
completely falls
right,
apart.
exactly.
There are different models. Montpelier, when I was on that board, I don't know if they still do it. It was the equivalent of a penny on the tax rate. It was a separate article, and they voted annually with it, and I think it was about $40,000.
Mhm.
And to your point, it accumulated and it took care of our capital projects plan at the time, so we weren't bonding for roofs and things like that. Having not been at the meeting, I'm not exactly sure what Bob's thinking.
Sure.
But that's another model you could look at. Maybe, if you're still allowed to do that legally.
Is this a future discussion item, or are we discussing it now?
I have said that we should actually probably put it
Yeah,
on
that's a
resolution.
report, so we'll put it on a future agenda. And although this isn't really totally related to the facilities committee, by seeing Fritz here, it reminds me that I said I would try to get in touch with the select board about what we could do about signage for the sort of traffic issue, which I see is related to our facilities. So I will try to remind myself to do that in the next day or two. All right, moving on, 6.0 discussion matters, 6.1 budget, 6.1.1 SU purchase services, and are we just approving that we want to keep all these, that we don't plan to change our purchase services? Our purchase services have gone down significantly because all the special ed costs that we used to buy from, or purchase from the SU now is required by law to be there. So our only choices are IT, Connecting Youth, food service, early, or English as a second, ELL, English language learners, and the ELP, the preschool program. So is there any, I don't know if anyone has anything to say on any of these? These are things that we typically have chosen to purchase through the SU, believing that we're getting more bang for our buck by doing these collectively.
One thing of note, the Charlotte CY services are still currently under discussion. So there may be either decision packet or presentation during your budget process about that piece.
Anyone? All right, 6.1.2, capital projects,
I'm gonna
3 to
pass.
5 year plan.
I'm gonna pass a hard copy down. If you bring your attention to the second page, the one you received electronically was missing the last few rows. Apparently it didn't fit on the sheet. So the only thing that looks a little different is on the bottom of that second sheet, where you'll see a subtotal of capital projects related to the 1939 building, and then an architect's estimate. Again, this is information the board has seen in a previous presentation about the feasibility study relative to all the capital projects related to the 39 building, encompassing a $2.1 million price tag. But I'd actually like to look at the first page first. I just wanted to bring that. So this, you haven't seen one of these 5-year plans. We didn't go over this last year. I think it's been 2 years since we've done this with the school board. But for those school board members who have seen a 5-year plan, this is, in previous years, this is very similar to ones that have been presented in the past. These are mostly ongoing projects necessary to maintain the building, with the exception of a few sort of singleton repair or replace items. For example, if you look down near the bottom, 4 up from the bottom, replacing the oil delivery system to boilers we have that estimated as $6,000 3 years out. But once you do that, we're not expecting to have to do that again for some time. But it's because of the price tag, it's on this maintenance and operations list as opposed to the bigger capital projects list. Couple other items that I'd like to bring your attention to that are a little bit unique. About halfway down, bless you, where you see install Westfield barrier, preventing vehicle access to the fields. So a few years back, we installed railroad tie like posts on the east side to keep people from driving from the parking lot onto the fields near the basketball courts there. And those have been effective. Unfortunately, we now have folks, it would make sense, are driving up the other side near the Quonset hut. And it's happened a few times. Luckily, it hasn't led to a big price tag yet in terms of field damage. We've had to do some minor repair, but it could easily, if the conditions were wet, destroy the fields. So we have an estimate of approximately $2,000 to take care of that this year.
And would that be just along the back or up?
So that's going to go from, even with the Quonset hut, all the way over to where the dumpsters are, along the grass line.
Right,
And then we're
be
gonna,
pessimistic, but they can go around.
around, I think the wetlands will keep them from doing that.
And the rink has a gate.
Right. Right, so and then we would run a gate or a chain from across where the dumpsters are, so that it would block off everything. For the $2,000 investment, we just want to get it taken care of. And along those same lines, some people on the board may be aware that we have an agreement with our neighbor across the way, Mr. Schermerhorn, that was, I think the agreement dates from 1987. It's a little file in my cabinet called Fire Pond. And basically, the school is responsible for the fire pond on Mr. Schermerhorn's property. And what that means is, basically, we have to maintain the fence. So Mr. Schermerhorn has been very gracious and polite about nudging us, like, the fence posts are going to fall down any day now. And in fact, they have been degrading over the last couple of years. So we invested the money this year and got that project done. And those are all new fence posts in that, around that fire pond. So just wanted to bring that to the board's attention. So other than that, the big piece that's new on this front sheet is that line that Mark mentioned at the bottom, which is an annual contribution to the construction fund. And I think Mark summarized it, the way the Facilities Committee was thinking about it, and the $25,000 number is up for discussion. But I think you have the basic idea of what that is about. We would accumulate some funds, and when things happen, like let's say the water line replacement, some of the things that you'll see on the next page, we can potentially tap into that construction fund and take care of it. Any questions on this page before we move to the next page? Just one more thing, I'm glad to report, if you look at the first two items, the band room flooring and then 1969 wing flooring, if we go as planned, after the 2016-17 school year, we'll have replaced all the flooring surfaces, with the exception of the hallway, in the first floor. Not counting the library, not counting the 1939 building. So that we've been doing a little bit each year with that, as the board has seen on previous 5-year plans. So on the next page, there's basically 3 sections here. The first section Mark described earlier about these are the urgent concerns that relate to essentially keeping the building weatherproof. And then the 1969 wing relight project, this is an issue that has come up on the previous feasibility study. So this is not a new issue. It's just reached a higher level of concern as we're seeing the lighting begin to fail. So this is something that we really need to do. There are going to be savings. So there is a payback to making this investment. the figures we have now are not really stellar. They're looking like a 16 or 17 year. You've paid for it in 16 or 17, you know, you're looking at saving $3,000 a year. But we're also looking into a less expensive, this is based on an LED lighting. We're looking at a less expensive setup, which is still gonna save us electricity, but maybe the payback will be quicker. So we have to do a little more homework there. The roofs are obviously a high priority. The art atrium roof, the gymnasium roof, and the north shingled roof. And then the main elevator replacement. When we started our conversation, that item didn't appear up there in the urgent concerns, but we tried to identify a year to place it, and it really felt very arbitrary, knowing that that elevator could fail on any day. It has failed. And we don't have a contractor that's willing to work on it. We have to have a working elevator, and we've been told it's dated and needs to be replaced. So it felt more responsible to put it up into that list of urgent concerns.
So, not to interrupt you, but, so obviously we're gonna need to put this on a future agenda to talk about going forward with the bond. Realistically, how soon do you think it'll be before we have a better idea if we can do an in-kind replacement and, you know, better information about the lighting? I mean, is this like a month out? Is it 2 months? I'm assuming
No.
we would wanna tie a bond to the vote in March if,
I think I can get you better information on both of those items by the next meeting.
okay.
So the next category of items are items that we're calling the 7-year plan now, because this obviously projects out 7 years. And shows a variety of when we think these jobs need to happen. And those could move up and down in priority as we move from year to year. We've pushed out the boiler replacement / upgrade further because we're looking at investing more on an annual basis into a more comprehensive servicing that goes beyond our regular service, but more of a descaling of the chambers. And we think we'll get more, since the repair we did last year, we think we'll get more life out of the boilers. And then, yes,
Are you in the 7-year capital plan?
that's where I was just about to leave. Yes,
Yeah,
go
so
ahead.
before you leave, the Quonset hut removal, so what's the replacement cost for whatever is housed in there?
Really depends on what we decide to do. In the last feasibility study that we presented to the board, in that $6 million proposal was, I believe, an inclusion of a replacement of some kind of garage. So it really would depend what we decided to build.
What is in there?
What is in the Quonset hut?
Library.
Okay, so it's, I would say about a third of it is a workshop, and the rest of it is storage. And so you've got old furniture, you've got old theater props, all sorts of stuff. We put old tech equipment there until we have the tech recycle day. It's a lot cleaner than it was 3 or 4 years ago, but there's a lot of junk in it.
So without it, you're gonna have to empty your garage.
Where did you get the price for the removal?
That price was from D&W.
From who?
Doran Whittier, in their last itemized capital projects list.
And where did they get it?
I would have to ask them. I don't know.
The reason I ask is because we have looked at that repeatedly. And that amount of money is not in keeping with other figures that we've seen. So I'd like to know how they generated that.
Yes, I think the previous figure that I've seen has been 50. Is that what's ringing a bell for you?
I've seen 50. Before that, I saw 89. I mean, I've seen a number of figures for it. There's asbestos down there.
Yes.
And lead paint.
Yes.
And it's going to be interesting.
Yep. Yeah, 66 is the number we got from Doran Whittier, and I can ask them for more detail around that. What Dave has said to me, Dave LeBlanc, at trainings he's been at recently, he's hearing talk about the regulations possibly changing relative to the lead paint. Right now, because of where the Quonset hut is and it's not considered a required, we don't have to address it. But he says there's a chance that the requirements will be more stringent based on the proximity to the building or the foot traffic. And he said that could be coming down the pike, but nothing for certain.
And the cost for the generator came from where?
The cost from the generator is also an itemized item from Doran Whittier and the work that they did compiling that feasibility study.
You'll have to take another look at that because it depends on what you're defining as an emergency generator and what kind of service you want it to be capable of.
I was surprised at that number, so I asked Dave more about that. And the conversation we had was basically that most of that number is the wiring, because you want to be able to run certain systems. So you have to run the cabling necessary from the generator to those systems. And then apparently the generator, if it's gonna be considered a emergency generator, comes in sort of like a vault type of situation, which is also very expensive.
And the logic of wiring to the specific systems, I mean, you have switches in the building.
Right.
If you have power and you identify that all you want to do is run the generator, the boiler and the circulating system, and you turn all the other switches off. It does not require wiring to all of the systems. It just involves not running the systems you don't want to run.
So the way it was explained to me is that get the wiring, it's expensive to get the wiring from the generator to the boxes that it's supplying power to. That ends my expert knowledge about this.
I think that's a number based on an elaborate system that is not necessary.
Luckily, that's 4 years out.
Well, so then the third section indicates these are items that, again, the board needs to be aware of. And these are all related to the 1939 building. None of these items are new information. These are basically all failing components of that old building. These items that you see listed add up to 1.1 million. When we look at Doran Whittier's summary from the feasibility project, again done last year, the estimate for all necessary 1939 building capital projects is about $2.1 million. And again, just to repeat what Mark said and what the facilities committee recommended last year, is we don't see it as a viable option to invest $2 million in that building.
Any other questions or comments? 6.1.3 budget buddies. And so does the board want to have budget buddies this year?
Did we have volunteers last year?
We did. We had 2. Only one made it. I think one came once and.
It should be an option. It should be an option. Whether we'll get anybody who actually wants to do it is another question.
Okay. Anyone else? Should we solicit through Front Porch Forum, or so that maybe we get a non-parent as a possible budget person?
I think everybody's an affectation. You invariably wind up with people who just are in favor of the budget. And I think whatever intake we take from the audience is as meaningful as a couple of people sitting over here and having a title. The real issue is how you communicate with the community at large, and two people here as budget buddies are going to have no effect on that, so I would skip it, but.
Okay, Susan or Eric, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I guess, you know, I've only been on the board for a year, so I've only seen sort of one cycle of that. And I guess, yeah, I kind of think Mark and Clyde both make good points. I mean, if it's really probably more a function of whether it's useful to the community.
Mhm.
Obviously, you know, last go round, it didn't seem like big sort of impact or big heavy participation from the budget buddy. So I'm not sure it's crucial, but if it were something where we felt that accomplished a goal relative to community interest, you know, we could look at it. But it doesn't seem necessary.
Yeah. Seems redundant, since they could just come to our meetings.
Okay. So maybe we should just instead be thinking about better ways to reach out. I mean, so maybe better use of Front Porch Forum and the papers to let people know this is what the sort of the meeting agenda, so that if people have an interest in whatever part of the budget, that they can make sure they get to those meetings.
Yeah, I think that's what people want to know, is when should they start attending meetings when we're talking about the budget
Right.
that they're voting
Okay.
on.
All right, 6.1.4, budget forum preparation. And I meant to look up, I don't even know, I can't remember what our date
You have
is.
two issues. One, are you having one? So, and if you are, what date you want to do it, and then you can decide what you need to prepare for. And this is the pre-hearing, this is before you start your budget work. And getting, again, kind of what you just talked about, input.
I thought for some reason in that initial calendar from Bob, we had a date, but maybe I'm wrong.
I have to turn to Sandy on that one, since she actually helped write it. But
So, yeah, our problem, although we have 6 people here, 5, our problem is that a lot of times we have these forums and we have very few people show up, but perhaps if we can articulate a reason why they should come and what kind of information that we can provide there that might be helpful and interesting. Does the board see value in having a forum before we start the actual budget process?
Well, having not gone through the process myself, since I'm new to the board, it sounds like it would be worthwhile if it was at CCS too. I think
Yeah,
that's
our
it.
budget meetings are at CCS, yeah.
the Heinsberg board decided to do it right prior to their first budget meeting, so it kind of blends in. That's just one idea. That was as much a scheduling thing as
Yeah,
strategic.
it probably makes sense to me.
That sounds like a good way.
Because then you've got the captive audience,
Yeah. Yeah, people-
hopefully, you get an audience.
All right. Does that make sense to people? I can't, it's not here on our next meeting dates, but let's
It's,
see. November.
December 2nd, I think.
We don't have any budget meeting?
Not in November because of the way Thanksgiving falls, as much as anything else. So your first one is December 2nd. It's that 2-week rotation of half the board's 1 week and you guys are in
Yeah.
the second half.
So does that seem too late, or, I mean, or does it make sense just to get people there and then?
There may be a limit to how many times people want to show up, so if it were combined with the budget meeting, it might kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
I don't think it's too late. I think there will be limited attendance, but I think you're kind of obligated to do this one. I don't think that's too late.
Okay. And I guess we're more likely to possibly have some realistic numbers by then, instead of we don't know, we haven't, you know. All
And
right.
you'll have received your baseline about 2 weeks before that, because you'll get your baseline at the November 17th meeting, whenever your next meeting is.
Okay, so maybe since we'll have a meeting, we'll have our own meeting before then, we can be thinking about how we want to do the forum. You know, we've done things before where we have people go around, or we just want to do a presentation.
At some point, this is a little bit of a tangent, but at some point prior to the actual vote on the budget, you need to make sure that the public is well informed regarding whatever capital plans and structural improvements or changes we're considering, because they'll be extremely irritated if they pass a budget and then we come back at some point for a bond. I heard you say that your preference would be to coordinate the two on the same day, but however you do it, as people begin to consider how much they're willing to spend to run the school, they also need to be aware of what they're going to be asked to spend to make changes in the building.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think unless we have it at the same time, it would be hard to.
It's my feeling that we'll have numbers that are firm by the next school board meeting, and we'll be able to discuss a bond at that December 2nd meeting. I was hoping they would coordinate together.
Because that may,
Because I agree with you.
that knowledge may bring more people to the budget forum.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you.
Okay. All right. 6.2 policy. We have 4 policies that are under review. I messed up the date and didn't actually attend that policy meeting. I thought it was a different day. Does anyone have any input on the policies? And Cindy also wanted to know if you found that the information provided, if it was too much, if it was too little. I personally thought it was great to have attached right to it relevant statutes, because although you see the references, to take that extra step to then go and look them up, most of us would just find that one step to be too hard. But what do people think, or do people have any input or changes that they want made to those policies?
Mostly we're looking for input on the proposed changes.
Yep.
Or if you have others we missed.
No, I liked having all the information.
Good.
I'm not gonna say that I read every particular statute, but yeah, it was nice that it was there.
It's a tipping point of giving you guys enough
Yeah,
and
that's
giving
right.
you so much you don't read any of it.
I think we felt comfortable with scoring a 5, but we knew it was there if we wanted it. Anyone have anything to, okay, because the policy meeting is tomorrow morning at 8, so we'll hear what the other, if any other boards, and otherwise those will come through next time as action items, is that right?
They'll, assuming all the boards were comfortable, we'll bring it back for adoption in November, the changes, and then you'll have another batch to review.
All right. 6.3 Act 153, 156. This is the requirement of having special ed at the supervisory union, and the law requires that the SU board decide whether or not our paraeducators are included within our SU employees or local school employees, and based in part on an evolving understanding of exactly what that law requires. The recommendation to the SU board last year was that we keep the paraeducators as local school employees. And in part, I think in part that was, we thought that would help ensure flexibility, so that you can say you're a special ed para for this part of the day, you're a general education para this other time. And the way it's been explained to us is that really everything sort of has to be at the SU. We could keep a local paycheck for the paraeducators, but the recommendation that administration is making to the SU board is that we just make it cleaner and have the paraeducators, SU employees, they would still be given their assignments and really their function within the school would not change. Who they report to wouldn't really change. Some details about seniority and things like that will be worked out with the paraeducators. And they're up for contract negotiations right now. Anyway, so the SU board would like to hear from all the local boards about whether or not anyone has an issue with them becoming SU employees. And the SU board will vote next month.
Actually, they're gonna continue discussion.
Oh, continue. I don't think we talked about it too much. Anyway.
It may go either way.
Yeah. So, does anyone have questions or input on that? All right.
I'm not sure that the law requires it. And
It doesn't require the thing.
I don't, depends on what your definition is of cleaner, when you say moving that all to one place. I didn't hear over there any really convincing explanation of the benefits that derive from that, as opposed to the process we've had in place, the arrangement we've had in place.
Well, I just
don't
think,
see-
I think it makes the money part of it easier and the human resources part of it easier. And if we can do something that's taking up less administrator time,
And cost.
doing that
Cost associated
minutia,
with it that
I think then
didn't
it
anticipate.
frees up time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
last
It's
year
also
was
the
voted on.
finance area.
Yeah.
Is there any concern from our administration's perspective on how that's set up?
No, we have had conversations about the seniority pieces and the assignment pieces. But I know that's to be worked out. But no significant concerns.
Do we have pairs that go back and forth during the course of the day?
Between buildings?
No, between special ed and
Yes.
general education?
Yes.
How many?
Most of them have some split. Not all of them, but I would say maybe 70 to 80% of them.
Yeah, have about an hour a day that's not reimbursable.
And then some have more of a substantial split where it's more like 60-40 or 50-50. But most have some kind of split.
And how predictable is that? I mean, with a given employee over the course of the year, how much does that change?
It's not so much the employee, it's the assignment. So it's fairly predictable from year to year because the jobs look similar. So you might be supporting a student one-to-one, but that student doesn't need support during lunch and recess, but that paraeducator supervises lunch and recess. That hour of lunch and recess is not special ed reimbursable. So that's kind of a repeating pattern for assignments. So that's fairly predictable.
We don't have many changes mid-year or throughout the year. Yeah.
Odds and ends.
Yeah.
Some.
You don't have any concerns in terms of your ability to use your personnel the way you want, or to structure their day the way you want, or to have the people that you want?
No, I mean, it would get tricky, I think, if we had seniority and assignments going across the SU. That would get tricky.
Because somebody might come and say, well, I like that job at CCS, and I'm senior, so I displace someone here.
Right.
So how, do we know how that's gonna?
We don't, we predict that the association will want to keep things local in terms of seniority, but we don't know that the teachers, when we started with them, wanted to keep it local, and then by the end of their own process, they decided they wanted SU-wide seniority. For the support staff, they tend to identify more with their school building, and they want to work in Charlotte, or they want to work in Williston. So that's just what we're anticipating, but we're not really sure how it will level out. For most of the time, we don't have to do any RIFs for support staff because they just, by their own transition year to year, we're always hiring paraeducators. So, so it's also not as pressing from a job security point of view as it is for teachers. But it is one of their main concerns. And we're, as a central office, we don't have a preference on that, and we're not looking to create SU-wide seniority for the paras, but we're not opposed to it either. So it's kind of the feedback from our principals and from the association, and that'll guide the negotiating team during that process.
And it wasn't totally clear why it's a lot more work the way it is now. I mean, presumably even if you had them all working for CSSU, you still have to go to Greg and say, how many hours did this person work doing that? And
Right, we still have to do time studies. Where the work comes up is the duplication of effort. So this year doing budget, it usually takes me about 14 days to do the personnel budget. This year it took me 24 days because I had to rebuild every single paraeducator that currently sits in all the local databases into the CSSU database to get an accurate number for the CSSU service plan and budget. Because regardless of whether the paras are local employees or CSSU employees, they have to be in the CSSU budget. If they're not in the payroll database, then I have to build them myself, which is,
was that sort of,
that's how you amuse my time,
but was that a
fine,
one-off
but
thing like that?
That's one thing. For Meg and Bob, it's a duplication of effort in terms of doing all the reports, pulling the data out of the systems and getting that information accurate for the state or the auditors or publishers looking for.
I guess
So
my question would
that's-
be, if you've had to go through that exercise once, are all those functions now in place? So then next year it's just you push a button and all that stuff's already in the
If
system?
the paras have transitioned over, yes, then I'm back to my normal 12, 14-day preparation period because now they're in the database. If they were to stay local, I'd have to repeat what I went through this year, rebuilding them because they're never in the CSSU database. Because we have to have 6 separate finance systems and 6 separate databases within that finance system. So it'd be great if they all talk to each other. They don't, they're built by tax ID number.
Right.
So that, and that's just a small thing, that's not even the impact on our staff within the Kathy Diamonds of the world that are trying to monitor all of this information. So that's just is more directly impacting me.
I think it will not hurt us to wait and see how the support staff negotiations turn out. And put this decision off.
Well, it's my understanding we really can't put it off because that will play into how the budgets are created.
Well, there's your, I'm trying to think about what you were in, FY16 budget baselines are done. So Mike and I have done that prep work for your meetings starting in November, December. So that work's already past this. This is more about going forward and that from that impact. The decision-making process in terms of where they sit, and kind of Elaine and Megan talked to us tonight, we don't have to have a decision in November. It has to wait till February or March. That's okay, but by June 30th, we have to know what we're doing. And for negotiations, because if you're going one way and you're negotiating this way, it could change things.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Hi, Elaine.
Hi.
Moving on, 6.4 Communications Board's Corner, next article submission. And I was hoping that Emma would be here, Emma Slater from the Charlotte News. She's a recent CVU grad who Brett thought would be coming to our meetings, but it has not worked out so far. And we've sort of stalled on the Board's Corner. Anyone have an idea? I assume we probably have a deadline of either this Monday or next.
It's this Monday.
It's this Monday.
I'm pretty sure.
We discussed at the SU meeting that CVU has a monthly plan, and I will be able to access that plan from Sue Grass, so she has like a Google Doc or something, so we could try to, dovetail articles by us sort of in keeping with theirs. Some of theirs will be really that affect all the schools, data-driven decision-making. Others might be more specific to CVU, but we could try to tailor so our articles are somewhat related. But for this month, I think we're just we'll just sort of have to be on our own.
You might want to talk about the budget process you all were just discussing in your upcoming forum, the capital projects, and what's kind of the picture going into it.
That's so good, Cindy. All right, well, maybe I'll draft something up and send it around. Okay. So budget and capital. All right. So I'll try to get something soon, but the sooner you can give me your feedback, the better, since that would be great. All right, 6.5, hiring process. This was put on the agenda out of interest from Clyde and Susan. And we're referring to pages 50 and 51. Did I print 50 and 51? It's so good you're here right now, Elaine. So, we have as part of 6.5, this sheet called hiring. Is this an SU? This is an.
Yes, these are the protocols.
Okay, these are the
that were
SU
developed and
protocols that discuss what happens when we're hiring a teacher. So I'll open it up to all of you. I personally think we have a good system in place, but,
So, where it says hiring committee, 5 to 8 members, representative of the school and particular opening. Examples of a representative committee include both general and special ed teachers, parents, other school faculty, administration. So, I would like to have, parents, clarified, and, I would like to have a school board member as a part of the interview team, or somehow in.
but why, I don't mean to sound confrontational, but why do you think that's valuable to have a
Because
school
when
member?
I was asked to sign off on somebody that was sort of approved, and I had no idea who the person was, it just felt very awkward. I mean, I don't know anything. Last year, when there was the new hire, it was the only process I went through, where I feel like we have so few hires that it would be great to be part of the process instead of just kind of. I just wasn't quite sure why I signed off on something not knowing the candidate. I would like to be on an interview process, on an interview team of some sort. But.
And would you think that a school board member, 1 of 5, would be an observer, or would be making choices about one candidate being better than another?
Well, I guess because there is this hiring committee that's made up of potentially parents, which I don't know if that question mark means.
can I speak to that?
Yeah.
So I developed these protocols to ensure that there was like some consistency and that there was a process that we were all following. And in developing the protocols, I met with each of the administrators in all of the schools and said, how do you do it now? And in some places, they do have parents, in some places, they don't. So that's why it's not required. The people who know the best, really, about who to hire are going to be the administrators and probably the faculty in that school. They have a sense of, like, what are the characteristics we're looking for, what's been the track record in terms of, the different kinds of people and what they bring to the table, that kind of thing. So whether or not they have parents, I didn't feel like that was necessary for me as superintendent to say you will have parents.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want to not list it so that it didn't give the idea that you could have parents. So that's why there's a question mark there, because the protocols are intended for the administration, not for, again, it's protocols, it's not the policy. Does that answer your question about what the question mark
It
means
does,
around
but, I would
parents?
just be curious as to if you did open up to parents, how that would possibly be, like, how would you ever find the parent that would be able to be on the interview team versus if we're elected to the school board, in a way, I feel like we are kind of representing the community, which I don't know how else you would,
Mhm.
make it fair to like
I
a
have been in a
parent?
school where we did have parents on committees, and it wasn't that hard. You know, so if we were hiring for like a particular grade level, it was just meeting with those teachers and saying who's a parent that's been active and asking them to be on the committee, and, you know, it wasn't that difficult to find somebody.
So then I
to
would
serve.
say that I think it wouldn't be that
So-
difficult to find a school board member who might be interested in
Right,
being
and I
on the
think that
committee.
what gets tricky about school board members is that you do get to say yes or no at the end as a committee, based on my recommendation. That's what the law is. That doesn't change, regardless of what the committee makeup is. I'm gonna come to you with a recommendation, and your right and authority is to say yes or no. And if you say no, then I'm gonna come back with one more. And you can say yes or no, and if you say no, then I'm gonna come back with one more. But it's not intended in the law that the board gets to look at 3 candidates and decide amongst the 3 candidates. So I think it gets tricky if you've got a board member on the committee. Let's say you are a board member, and now you're on a committee, and the committee, everyone except for you, the board member, recommends a particular person. And then you're coming to the board and you're saying, I was on that committee and I don't recommend that. I could see that that could cause all kinds of havoc. You would hope, I mean, any committee that I've ever led, I've always said, when a committee is working, everybody around the table agrees on the selection. And there's not like, it's not that we're taking a vote and it's consensus. It's that every single person around the table agrees this is the right candidate. I think that adding a board member does add a level of possibly concern.
I mean,
Especially if there were, you know, some conversation that you'd had around the table at some other point that was now influencing how you saw it.
but I think the extent that you're asking the board to give a thumbs up or thumbs down,
That's the
again,
law.
you know, I'm new, so maybe Susan and I just don't get it, but either you're doing it and you're not asking the board, or you're asking the board and you're asking the board to make a judgment based on some kind of knowledge or understanding of what's gone into this, right?
Right, so the knowledge and understanding would be, here was the process. Here are the number of candidates we had. Here's, you know, how we narrowed it down.
But to me, that's just like the multi-tiered systems of support. Like, you explain to me your process once and then go to it, right? But don't come to me every time and say, I've got a kid who, we're gonna put him in tier 2 or tier 3, because that's your
Right.
job, not mine. But if it is my job to vet a candidate or sign off
But
a
it
candidate,
isn't, though. That's the thing. It's not the board's job to vet a candidate.
or to sign off on one, I'm not sure it's necessarily bad. You know, maybe you could say the board has an observer, at least to better understand, you know, that particular outcome. I don't know. Again, you know, I'm new, and I'd rather hear it from Clyde because he's been at this a lot longer. But you know, it seems to me like if you want us to just sort of say, we approve that this is how you go about it. You interview X number of people, you base it on these criteria, and great. Or if you say, you know, we want you to kind of look at each, when you attach the resume, right?
For the one that we're recommending.
Right, so presumably we're making some judgment based
Well,
on a piece of paper that describes who they are.
Or we're trying to submit to you, you should have confidence in us because we've done our due diligence. And we are the administrators who've made sure that we've checked references, we've, you know, asked all the right questions, we've asked the person to maybe teach a lesson, we've gone to watch them teach a lesson. You know, it's the professionals, and Susan, I know you're a teacher, so that kind of like clouds it a little bit, but the fact is, it's the professionals who should be making these decisions.
And I think
I
that
think.
too, you know, what is our role as a board? Our role isn't to make sure that the boiler's being descaled, and telling Greg how to have somebody do that. And our job also isn't to, you know, be monitoring the new 3rd grade teacher hired and making sure that she's doing what she needs to do to be able to, you know, provide our kids with what they need in that classroom. Our job is to sit above all that and say, this is what we want on a bigger scale, and you do the best job you can so that you're reaching those outcomes, so that our kids are getting a great education, so that we're, you know, doing all this within our budget. I think
if we start going in here. First of all, I think if we have one board member, it's not the 5 of us. So I don't see how that necessarily changes the fact that we're just given a candidate's name and have to say yes or no. But I think also it starts us down that path towards micromanaging. I think it's more important for us to have people that we trust and believe can do a good job in leading our school and choosing, you know, who's going to be teaching our kids in the classroom. Go ahead.
Kristen has in part verbalized the point, which is that everybody west of Elaine sitting here needs to come to some kind of decision about whether there's a purpose in having a school board or whether there isn't. The way the system is arranged now, in reality, we might as well not be here, because for Elaine to show up here with one person and say, this is the person, you're going to reject that based on what? The way they spell their name? I mean, it's meaningless. And I think Elaine's comment that it's not the board's job is offensive to the idea that these people have some voice, meaningful voice, in how their school is run. The most important people in the building are the teachers. I mean, that's it. And we never see them or talk to them or hear from them prior to. We interview the administrators, we interview the superintendent, we interview all these people, but we don't interview or have any part in the selection of the most important people in the school. It really, outside of making no sense, as I say, it's offensive to the electorate, because they go to the polls thinking that what they do there is going to have some meaningful role in how their school is run. 1 vote in 5, of course, is not going to, you could still come forward with the candidate whom the other 4 support, but the way this thing should really work is, as it used to be, the superintendent or the administrators would come forward with 2 or 3 or 4 recommendations. You can still say, this person X in executive session is my recommendation, but here are the other choices, and here's the conversation, and there will have been one of us there to hear that and give a little more reliable feedback. So the way this system should work is there should be a board member on this committee. There should be more than one candidate presented, and we should be able to make a decision based on something that constitutes actual information rather than the pasia that we hire good administrators so we can just be a policy board, write policies, and have no meaningful role in what goes on in the building. So, in my opinion, is this should be elevated to the level of an action item, and we should change how we go about doing this.
So the part that you can change a lot of what you just said, but the part you can't change is that the superintendent will bring a candidate, because that's in statute.
You know, we're all lawyers now, but what I just said will hold true. You can still, in that process, say, this is the candidate I support, this is the candidate I recommend to you, and that satisfies the requirement of the law. But that not only means that we wouldn't have to approve that, it would mean we have some rational and intelligent reason for not approving it. So yeah, that doesn't change. I mean, you still have that prerogative.
It's not a prerogative. I mean, Cindy's got the statute out right here, and I think it's in your package.
But the statute does not say, and you have to hire this person.
No, the statute says you can say no.
Yeah, well, if you're going to say no, unless you're some kind of a halfwit, you've got to have reason to say
Right.
no. And as it is, we don't have any reason to say anything. We could just leave the room and let them deal with it.
Well, no, you can still say no.
With what purpose? I mean, how foolish would we look to these people if we sit here and say no based on nothing?
Well,
So, but here's
You
the
do
larger
get the
problem. So,
information.
how many resumes did we get for the third grade teacher position? 100? 200?
Between 80 and 100.
So where do we insert ourselves into the process? Do we get first cut at the resume? Do we go watch them teach? I don't have time to do that. I'm not qualified to hire a teacher, truthfully. I wouldn't be able to look at 100 resumes and pick out the 20 best that we then go to the next step with. Yes, I think that is an administrative job, and if bad teachers get hired, we have to fire the administrators. I think that's my personal opinion. If you want to have a discussion about bringing more than one resume to the board, I can see how that could have some value. But as far as just having one member on the board, that clouds the issue even further, I think.
Well, it clouds the issue only if you question your judgment. And the sorting of resumes is an administrative function that we don't need, or the committee doesn't need to look at 100 resumes. Somebody has to make a decision that narrows that down to a manageable level. But then beyond that, there's only one way to get knowledge, and that is to be involved in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in hiring where people in the interview process don't necessarily have the technical knowledge for that role, but they're there to judge character, how the person presents themselves. There are a lot of intangibles, there are a lot of qualities about a person that can be gleaned through the interview process that can't be understood by looking at a resume. And so, you know, I wouldn't advocate for some sort of, you know, trying to have a board member run the process and dictate how it should go. But to the extent that we are asked to consent to a hire, to make an informed decision, at the very least, I think, I guess I have a hard time seeing how it would be disruptive to the process to have a board member participate.
It changes the dynamic. It really does. The difference between a teacher search and an admin search, that board voice is stronger no matter how you set up that committee. It will influence the outcome because of the board member. Fair or not,
It's
that's
supposed
the
to
reality.
influence the outcome. That's the point of having membership.
Well, I keep trying to think of, you know, if we kept this committee structure and added a board member, if I'm the, I mean, let's just be personal, if I'm the board member who is on that committee, and I'm bringing back to you, I think this is the best candidate, or I don't think that one is, what value does that bring, me personally being on it, what value would that bring to you in considering whether or not to say yes or no to a candidate? I mean, unless all 5 of us are on there, which that seems pretty ridiculous to me, but otherwise, how am I forming a judgment about whether or not that person's better or worse because one of the 5 of us is on it if it's not me? You know, how would I think that you're in a better position or Mark's in a better position than the people who it's their job to figure out? We need someone with a better tech background to complement that other teacher on that team. We need someone who is really strong in verbal communication, you know, what they need to make that teaching group click. I don't see how me being on it or any one of us being on it brings more to the board than just this is our best choice based
I
on
mean,
the
I'll give you an example
recommendations.
or a hypothetical, and that would be the accumulated sort of wisdom of seeing that process play out over a number of times, and another set of eyes, particularly from the board, who has to approve, might recognize, hey, you know, this is how we've had a couple missteps with hires. These are the kinds of patterns that we've seen, or this was the kind of candidate that didn't look like it worked out as well as they might have appeared at first blush. Or if you really don't have an opinion, you don't necessarily have to be like the sand in the wheels of progress, right? You can say, look, this is who they picked. I don't really have any particular reason to disagree, but at least the board had. I guess that's what I'm struggling with is to the extent that we're asked to approve it, at the very least, you know, without being unreasonable, like you said, and just standing up and saying no for no reason. Right now, we don't say no for no reason. I'm not sure we'd say no for no reason if we sat in on getting to see the candidates and being, you know, involved in the process.
Look at it this way. Mark doesn't know any more about most of the things that are on this list than he does about teaching special education. But we have a board member, which happens to be Mark, on here. What's the difference? The difference is that the teachers are much more important than the lighting in the 69 wing. And if your intent is to have the school board have a meaningful role, there above anything else is where you should have some participation.
But just like the teacher hiring process, this list, I didn't come up with these numbers. We went to an expert who came up with these numbers.
But you're on the committee and you have
I'm
input.
on the committee
and
to-
you get
to
bring
provide
us-
you the
You
information.
get to bring us our opinion of what that is, your opinion.
My opinion of the expert who provided us with what the
And
repair
that
should be.
would be precisely the way it would work to have a board member on the hiring committee.
So, people want this as an action item?
You'd
What do
actually
people wanna
need to, I mean, because these are procedures, so the board doesn't act on procedures, so I don't know how we move forward, but, one other thing, something Eric said, if there are missteps in the procedure, or I don't understand how putting a board member will change missteps. The way to address missteps is through the evaluation process, either the superintendent or the administrators. That is totally the board's work to do. So if they're not hiring the right people, or we don't have the right procedures, that's.
There might be
for
different,
us.
I'm not saying that board member would be a cure-all, I'm just saying it's a different set of experiences and a different set of, I mean, basic experience, right? And people might see something, they might say, hey, well, we just lost a teacher who quit after 1 year. What was it about her character or his character that might have come across in an interview that, if we were looking just through the narrow lens of, the teaching skill maybe.
That would come up in the hiring committee.
Right, and if there were something to be shared there, it could be that we wouldn't be able to share it with a board member. That's another piece around the dysfunction, in my mind, of having a board member at the table, is that there are things that you really then wouldn't want to talk about to the person who is the hirer.
Well,
So
so-
that-
To Cindy's point, about how we go forward from here, this clearly has interest here on the board that needs more than just a discussion item. So whether that action item that we discuss is just advisorial
Mhm.
to go forward, or we can change policy, I guess that's something we need to know.
Okay. I think that's good. Let's figure out
What's next?
the next step. Okay.
And who's gonna figure out that next one?
Well, Cindy's gonna have to see it's procedure, not policy, so
Right,
it'll
the
be on the
board doesn't
next
it-
agenda
Isn't
planning.
it done?
So there'll be something on the next agenda saying either it's another discussion or an action. And I just leave you, think about how having one of the five of us is gonna really change things. That's sort of my takeaway. But we'll figure out the next step for,
Well, it wouldn't necessarily have to be
Advising
one
procedure.
of the five, it could be, we have all these other committees, we just meet as a committee, perhaps.
But again, I don't think it's meant to be a challenge to anyone's.
No, but I will
Expertise.
say, for the board to start interviewing teachers is,
No, we would not be interviewing
well,
the
if you're,
teachers,
the
but we'd
whole
be,
board is on the committee.
well, it would be
well, that would
narrowed
be an
down
open
by the
meeting law, that you
administration.
you couldn't have the whole board.
Yeah.
You couldn't have more than two.
I mean, some of the things that you've suggested are things we certainly can think about. The idea of coming with a recommendation, but saying to you, and here were the other candidates that we looked at and why we chose. I think that's a reasonable thing that we could do.
We might have to not tell you the names of those other candidates, though, because they have
Right.
confidentiality.
If I were you guys, I would not bite on that. We don't hear, really, other than from Elaine, from the other members of the committee. There's no substitute for firsthand knowledge, and there's only one way to get that. Now, in a way, Cindy has simplified the situation by pointing out talking about procedures rather than policy. This doesn't require a change of policy by your definition. This just requires us deciding that one of these committee members will be one of us.
All right. 7.0, action matters, 7.1.
And let me just add a post-thought here. If somebody intends to arrive here at a later date with a legal opinion, we need to be advised of that ahead of time in order that we can form some reaction to that. Because any legal opinion that disputes what's been discussed here tonight is going to be subject to question.
Well, you have the legal.
Well, that's what I'm
backup
saying.
in the-
Within what we have,
Right.
there's no reason why we cannot have a board member in this process. Somebody's going to show up here in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and say, oh, and here's another law. I want to know about that beforehand.
I mean, I kind of ties in the presentation. I think the board members have a question. Call Nicole Mace at VSBA. She's independent of us, and she can give you an opinion or not. Or Steve, either one of them.
All right, 7.0, action matters, 7.1, we need to appoint a support staff negotiations committee representative. And although Eric did a wonderful job in the last round, he obviously cannot be our negotiator this time. So do I have a nomination to appoint a support staff negotiator?
And nominate Eric.
He can't, his
I-
wife
I-
is a para.
I'm
His
sorry?
wife is a para educator at the
Oh,
school.
that's right,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's too bad.
I mean, I'll do it if nobody wants to do it. I'll do it.
Clyde, would you be interested?
Not for the support staff.
So I need a nomination.
I nominate Mark McDermott.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Do I have a motion to, 8.0, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. 9.0, director's comments.
I don't think so.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Thanks.
So remember the book fair
Yeah.
this week, and the craft fair is what date? November 22nd. And I think I forwarded, but I will resend to all of you that the PTO has invited us to come talk about the budget. December 10th. But I'll send that around again, so that people want to go. And thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, for the PTO thing, would we have to sort of appoint 2 people to go? And if all 5 of us showed up, would we have to warn that ahead of time?
No,
No.
not, as long as you didn't do board business.
And don't sit next to each other.
Oh.
I don't know. All right, 10.0, confirm next meeting dates. Our next regular board meeting is here, November 19th at 7, with the CSSU meeting preceding it at 5. And the common topic next month is tech integration exemplars.
Actually, we're switching that, so you'll know about that. We're
We're gonna switch that.
So it's going to be, it's a switch between that one and the one Megan was gonna do early, the early education.
Okay.
ELP or.
Well, you'll get information ahead of time,
Yeah.
early education. So we don't need,
that says-
or do we need an executive session?
Didn't even notice that.
So we don't need executive, we just needed to appoint someone to be our support staff negotiator.
I thought we would, but
Okay,
we will need one in November.
all right. 12.0, we're adjourned.